Learn classes in JavaScript. In the previous episodes, we learned about objects. So here I manually created a new object enemy that has two properties, HP and damage. But what if I want to create many objects and I want to create them dynamically? So for example, in the beginning, I don't know how many objects I need. So for that, we can use classes. So like in this example, class is a building that generates objects. So for example, here, this class generates 5 different units and they are all very similar. For example, this unit has a sword and shield. This unit has another sword and the same shield, and this unit has the same sword but another shield, and so on. So all these objects are very similar and there are many, so we can dynamically create them. Let's write a class for this object enemy. For that, I start from the keyword class. Then I write the name of this class. Typically, we start from capital letters. So I will write enemy with a capital letter. And then I put curly braces. So and now inside of the class, I can define different properties. So let's define HP and damage. So you see that both these structures are very similar and there are many mistakes that you might have. So let's quickly cover them. So for example, when you create a class, you add an equal sign. And in this case, you will have the error that curly brace expected. So when you have this kind of error, you need to understand that you need to remove this letter that has this kind of error. In our case, this is an equal sign. So let's remove it. Also, as you see, we define properties differently. So we define them absolutely the same as common variables, but we don't use let or const keywords. So for example, I defined HP and damage variables, and now you see that in the same way, we define properties inside of the class. What happens if we try adding let or const keywords? If I add let, you will see that this is unexpected token. And if I add const, you will see that const modifier can only be used in TypeScript. And also let's cover what if you change equal sign to a colon. In this case, you will see that type annotation can only be used in TypeScript. So in the future, when you learn TypeScript, you will understand what it means. But currently, you need to understand that you need to remove your colon and replace it with an equal sign. But typically, we don't hard code values inside of the class. So we want to pass our values dynamically, and for that, we are using Constructor. So let's remove these values. So here we keep only keys of our pairs. As you see, they are the same as we have in our object. And then I write the keyword constructor. And then I put parentheses and curly braces. And now inside of the parentheses, I can pass all these values. So I need to pass a value for our HP and the value of our damage. And now you need to clearly differentiate them. Even though that the names are the same, these names are referring to the name of the key. So this is the same as in our object, you see HP and damage are the names of these pairs. And these names that you are passing into the constructor are the values. So they represent 110 from our object. And then you assign these values to the keys. For that, I am using a typical construction, this.hp, which is referring to the key that is defined inside of the class. And then this is equal to hp, and this is the parameter that I pass to the constructor. And let's write the same for the damage. And this is how a typical constructor looks like. So if you want to add new properties to this class, here you type the name of the key, and then you type the same name to the constructor, and this would be a value of this pair. So now let's generate our object using our class. So the name of this variable is enemy from class, and then I need to write a keyword new, and then the name of the class. And then I also add parentheses. And now you will see that you have several options, so we can pass HP and damage, and these options are the same as we defined in the constructor. So at first, let's log to the console this object. And now you see that we have an object with two key value pairs. So the first key is HP and the second key is damage, but we haven't passed any values for these keys, and this is the reason why they have default values of undefined. And even if I expand this object, you will see that these values are undefined. So now let's pass the real values. And now you see that we have the same object as we defined above our class. So let's also log to the console our manually created object. From the first view, you see some difference. So our object that is generated from the class has the name of this class. But if you expand both these objects, you will see that they both have the same key value pairs, and also the third option is prototype object. So it means that the type of this variable is an object. Now to show you the power of classes, let's create a function that generates 100 enemies. So I define a new function generate 100 enemies, and here I will create a for loop for 100 iterations. And now I can create a new object and then log it to the console. And now let's call this function. And in the console you see that we have 100 units, but currently they are all the same. So actually we can change the values for HP and damage for each unit. So for example, instead of the damage 10, let's use our variable I. And now you see that all units have different damage. So let's do the same for our HP. And now in the console, we have 100 different units. Once again, let's talk the difference between class and object. I log to the console our class and object enemies, and now you see that a class is the constructor for our objects. And the result that this class returns is an object. So what you can see that if I log to the console enemy from the capital letter, you see that this is a class and we just see the block of code. So we can't do anything with that. Then I'm using the same class for generating a new enemy object. So when I'm talking about objects, I'm referring to the variables. And when I'm talking about the class, I'm referring to this block of code that starts from the keyword class. Now we stored only properties in our class, but we also can store methods. So methods are functions that are defined in the class. For example, let's create a new method getHP. As you see, I don't use a keyword function, I just write the name of the method that I want and then I put parentheses. And when I put parentheses, VS Code can automatically detect that this is a method and the full name of this method is enemy.getHP. So this is the reason why we can have the same methods in different classes. So let's create a new object and then call this method. Now I called our method getHP, and as you see in the console, we have the result of 100. These kind of methods that are returning some properties from the class are called getters. Now let's write a function that assign a new value for our properties. So this function is called setter because this method assigns a new value for our property. So, and as you see, it works absolutely the same as our constructor. Our constructor is the default setter for our class. And now we can use this function to assign a new value for our HP. And now you see that from the first log, the HP of our enemy is 100. So this is what we defined in our constructor. And then I set a new HP for this enemy using the setter. And in the second log, you see that our HP is 150. So it means that our HP have been updated successfully. Also, there is one rule that you need to know. When you type the name of the object and then put dot, you will see the list of all properties and methods that this object has. And you shouldn't access properties outside of the class. You should access only methods. Even though that I can access damage property and then I can set a new value for this damage, I shouldn't do it. This code will be much more difficult to maintain in the future. So every time when I want to assign a new value or when I want to get the value, I need to use getters and setters. I have one trick for memorizing this rule. So inside of the class, you can access properties, and you access them using the keyword this. So for example, in our getter, we have this.hp, and then in our setter, we also have this.hp, which are referring to the property that we have inside of this class. And when you access a property using this dot and the name of the property, you are good to go. You don't break any rules, and this is a secure way of changing your properties. But then outside of the class, you see that I can't write this dot name of the property. I write the name of the class enemy, then I put dot, then I write the name of the property damage. So when you see this construction that you are accessing properties using the direct name of the class, you need to understand that you are breaking rules. Instead of the writing enemy.damage, you should write enemy.getDamage method. And now let's define this method inside of our class. And once again, inside of our class, I access damage using the keyword this, so it means that I don't break any rules. And for practicing this rule, let's write a new function battle. And for this function, I want to create two units, an ally and an enemy. We can create a separate class for ally, but in this case, you will see that we have two very similar classes. So we have a lot of repetition. In order to prevent this repetition, we can create both units using our first class enemy. And as I want to create ally and enemy, let's change the name of this class to a more generical name, something like unit. And now it means that this class can generate all kind of units that we need for our battle. Now let's create both these units. Now I have two different objects using the same class unit, and now let's imagine that our enemy hits first, so we need to decrease the HP of our ally. For that, I type ally, and then I want to change the HP of this unit, so I shouldn't access property. For that, I have a method setHP. So let's use this method. And now from the initial amount of HP, we want to decrease the damage of our enemy. So for accessing our HP, I'm using the getter. And for accessing our damage, I also use a getter. Then let's imagine that our ally hits the enemy, and now we need to decrease the HP of our enemy. I also use setHP method, and here I access the initial HP of our enemy, and then I subtract the damage of our ally. And now let's log to the console our units and then call our function. And now you see in the console the initial HP of our units, and then you see that they have been decreased by 20 and 10. This is also difficult to differentiate who is an enemy and who is an ally, so let's create a new property name inside of our class. So I want to have the first property name, and this is the reason why I will add it in the beginning of our properties. Then inside of the constructor, I also add this parameter. So the order of my properties and parameters are the same. And then I assigned our name to a new value. And now when I generate our objects, let's also write the name of this object. And now in the console we see that the first unit is our enemy and the second unit is our ally. So we can easily differentiate them. In the next video, we will continue practicing with JavaScript objects.